welcome to your Construction Safety Association of Manitoba's 2024 Safety and Health Week virtual webinar series. Safety and Health Week is a continent-wide event spanning the countries of Canada, USA, and Mexico. The goal of Safety and Health Week is to focus the attention of employers, employees, partners, and the public on the importance of preventing injury and illness in the workplace, at home, and in the community. My name is Megan Story, and I am the Training and Development Manager here at the Construction Safety Association of Manitoba. We are proud to be recognized as your premier and trusted source for safety and health information, resources, training, and core certification. Today's Safety and Health Week virtual webinar is an example of how we are striving to provide you with practical and relevant information to help you succeed in accident prevention in your workplace. For those of you who know CSAM, quite simply, our answer is yes. How can we help? We will have the answers to your safety questions, or we will find the answer with the help of our qualified resources and partners in safety and health. Today, I am pleased to introduce Irene Bennink, who will provide a trauma-informed and destigmatized approach to opioid poisoning awareness. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and a copy of Irene's presentation will be made available. Please feel free to put your questions into the chat, and following Irene's presentation, she will be able to answer those questions for you. Irene, the screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Megan. Let me just share my screen and we're off, folks.
There we go.
There we go. Perfect. All right. So welcome everyone to the Opioid Poisoning Response Training 1-hour session here. So my name is Irene. I'm with St. John Ambulance, and we'll be talking about a few topics here related to opioid poisoning, or as we used to hear it as opioid overdosing. I'll explain a little bit why we have to change in terminology in a little while here. But the goal behind this presentation will be to bring awareness to opioid poisoning, as it can happen anywhere. It could happen in a workplace, it could happen in schools, but we'll take a look at why it is so rampant nowadays. I do want to start by acknowledging that we are gathered on Treaty 1 territory, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Cree, Dakota, and the Dene people, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. So what I want to cover in the next hour with you folks are three main topics. One is taking a look at the stigma around the use of drugs, as well as talk a little bit about harm reduction. I know for many people, hearing about opioid poisoning or overdosing is nothing new. It is something that is very rampant in our society nowadays. And it definitely has been made worse by the pandemic, with people being isolated, not having access to medical help. It has really exacerbated the situation for many people. So I do want to take a look at how opioids are affecting each and every one of us, and how we can be aware if someone is using drugs, if they're getting in trouble with those drugs, and how can we help them if they're going into that poison state. I do want to talk about harm reduction as well, just to clarify some of the myths that are around harm reduction, and to understand why harm reduction is important for anyone that is using drugs. I do want to take a quick look at some of the more common types of opioids that we have here in Manitoba, and how they affect us as people, whether we're taking those drugs or we know someone maybe close to our hearts that are taking those drugs. So I really want people to understand really what that impact is. Then we'll finish it out by taking a look at how to manage an opioid poisoning emergency. So how do we recognize if someone is overdosing? How can we help right away? How can we get them to medical help to make sure that that we have a successful ending, that we hopefully that person gets revived from that poisoning that is occurring. We'll take a look at what we call the Save Me steps. Those are the steps that we need to take to ensure that that person who has been poisoned by those drugs has the best chance of survival. Because the one thing we need to remember about opioid poisoning is that opioids affect the central nervous system, which block pain, which is normally why people are using opioids. So they might be taking painkillers because of an injury that has happened to them. It could be work related, doesn't have to be work related, but many painkillers that are prescribed by doctors contain opioids, and many people are not aware of that. So just need to get an awareness out there so that people are aware that, hey, you know what, I might be using drugs that are opiate based. So there is a chance that this could happen. And I'll explain to you, how this can happen. Okay, so kind of in a nutshell, that's what we're going to be looking at in the next hour here. One of the first things I want to kind of take a look at is the fact that it is so easy for people to get addicted to drugs. When we're talking about opioids, as I just mentioned, it's very possible that either you, yourself, or someone you know is taking painkillers in order to deal with some kind of a painful situation. It could have been that accident that happened at work or at home, or it could be an ongoing medical condition that is extremely painful, and the person was prescribed painkillers to deal with that pain. Now, what we know about many drugs is that once you start taking drugs, if you're not careful, if you're not well monitored, it's very easy to end up taking more drugs, more of the dose than you're supposed to. We've all done that, right? You have a bad headache, you're taking a Tylenol or an Advil, whatever it is that you take, and you read the directions, and it tells you take 1 to 2 pills every 3 to 4 hours. Well, we take that one pill, and if that headache doesn't go away, we take another one, right? And hopefully that works. If that doesn't work because the headache is so bad, we'll just take another one. What most of us will do is we're going to take the medication the way we need it, the way to the point where it's going to make us feel better. And that doesn't matter whether it's a Tylenol or an Advil or some pain meds that you're using. You're going to use it the way that you need to. Now, as you can see here on this slide, we're talking a little bit about a quote here from Dr. Glenn Doyle. He mentions that we don't just treat addictions. When a person is addicted to something, whether it's drugs or alcohol, there usually is a reason why they're taking that medication or that alcohol, that drug. It's usually to deal with something, whether it's physical pain, mental pain, whether it's depression, anxiety, loneliness, whatever. People are taking medication to deal with that situation. And what they're going to do very often is they take more and more to deal with that situation that is getting worse. If a person now decides that, you know what, I don't want to take these drugs anymore, I want to stop drinking, it's very difficult to treat that addiction once a person's been addicted, because your body has gotten used to the amount that it's taking, whether it's drugs or alcohol. And it's very difficult to stop, because quite honestly, you can't just stop something cold turkey, because there's a reason behind why a person is taking that drug or that alcohol. So as it says here on the slide, what we're realizing when we're trying to treat addiction is that you can't just stop the addiction. You have to deal with the issue that has caused that addiction. So first we treat that situation, and once that situation is treated, then we can deal with that addiction. The same thing happens with opioids. Once a person starts using those opioids, and they use a little bit more and a little bit more, their body builds up a tolerance to that amount that is being used, and that person has to keep taking that amount or more, because the body is now used to it. It's built up a tolerance to that drug. You're now technically addicted to that drug that you're taking. So if that was opioids, you're now addicted to opioids, and you can't stop using it on your own free will. it normally takes medical help to get off that opioid. And as we know right now, it's very difficult to get any kind of medical help when it comes to detox or reducing the amount of drugs that are in your system. So we have seen quite an increase from before the pandemic. And if we look at some of the numbers that are out there, we see that opioid poisoning deaths have increased by 91% over the pre-pandemic level. So it is extremely high, and people are stuck in that space. They can't stop taking those drugs. If they try to stop, they go into real severe withdrawals called dope sickness. And that feeling is, if you think back to the worst flu that you've ever had, multiply that by 100. Think of those aches and pains that you had and multiply those by 100. That is the kind of, that would be what a person who's going into withdrawals would feel like. So they know that it's horrible to try and stop. So they usually can't stop on their own. And we have seen people that have tried to stop on their own and they've died of organ failure because their organs are used to that amount of drug. So it's really difficult for them to stop. They need that medical help, medical intervention to actually get off those drugs. So that's kind of what this slide is all about. It's just explaining that, you know what, there are reasons behind why a person is using drugs. And once they are, it's really tough to get off them. We do have to deal with the issue that got that person there, and then slowly wean them off those drugs that they're taking. And very often people are afraid to come forward and actually tell someone that they are using drugs, that they are using opioids, because they're afraid of that stereotyping around drugs. Because I'm sure as soon as we hear the word, someone who's using drugs, people's minds automatically go to people who are unsheltered and they're using drugs to live on the streets, or kids who are using drugs just because they're experimenting. Yeah, so those are a couple of the groups that get affected by drug use, but there's a much larger group out there as well. Right? We have those who are in the construction industry or any heavy trades where they get injured on a regular basis, or quite often, I should say. And when they do get injured, they might have to take pain meds to deal with that pain. And they could end up getting addicted to that pain drug. And now they're stuck there. So then in order to feel better, they got to take a little bit more. And as I said, some folks are afraid to mention to their doctors or their families or even their coworkers that they're taking pain meds and that, they're not sure what to do about it. They might be addicted now, but they don't know how to get out of that addiction. That stereotyping is all around us. We're afraid of how our family members might treat us if they found out that we're now addicted to drugs. Some people are afraid to get help from the medical field because they're afraid they're going to get stigmatized as a drug user as well. And so a lot of people will rather live with the problem that they're having right now rather than deal with that stereotyping that is out there regarding drugs. So what we want to do is get rid of that stereotyping, that labeling that is out there, so people feel comfortable stepping forward and asking for the help that they need. So let's get rid of those labels. Let's get rid of that discrimination that's out there, and let's help people. Because we want to make sure everybody is aware that, people get involved in drugs for any number of reasons. Okay. Some of them are for pain. Some of them are just to get through a really rough situation. Who knows what the reason is? But we want people to know that, hey, you know what? This is a human being that is dealing with a struggle right now. And let's help that human being. Let's not discriminate about them. Let's just help them through this situation. And if people are more comfortable speaking about what they're going through, speaking about the fact that they are using drugs, we'll have more people there that are able to help this person through whatever they're struggling with. And so that openness, that communication is a very important part of this whole situation. If we are able to have an open conversation about mental health, about drug use, it's going to make it much easier for people to come forward and get that help. And that's what I'm kind of trying to get out there with these kind of presentations. So one of the ways that we can get that communication out there, get that understanding out there, is to break down those barriers and that stigma surrounding mental health, and that the reason behind using opioids. One of the ways we can do that is by changing our language around drug use. Right, so we would much prefer if we can change the language around drug use to person first language. So just letting people know that we realize that there is a human behind this struggle, and we want to be there to help that person get through that struggle. So we can see on that slide that you have in front of you right now, we have two columns in that table. The column on the left is the terminology, the words that we use quite often to describe someone who is taking drugs. And the column on the right is the column that we kind of want to migrate towards, the words we want to use, so that people feel more accepted, they're more willing to reach out for help, right? So if we look at words such as an addict or a user, drug abuser, junkie, those are all words that kind of identify the person as being the problem, but we want to change that, right? We want to identify that that person is a person with a substance disorder, or a person with an opiate use disorder, or a patient, a person who uses drugs. So we have that person standing out there as the one who's having that struggle. If we look at the word abuse, there are different ways of identifying, the word abuse, different ways of using it. For example, anyone who uses illicit drugs, we kind of want to just change the terminology to drug use. Anyone that is using prescription medication and they're using it, other ways than they should be, so they've increased their own dosage, they haven't, their doctor hasn't been advised of that, right? So if we look at that terminology there, we can change it to drug misuse rather than abusing those drugs. Right? It could be, can I be identified as used other than prescribed, or using them the way that I want to use them, right? So, which typically we do. We use those drugs the way we need to use them. We can see that terminology for clean. We'll change that a little bit to tested negative, or being in remission, or recovery, which makes it sound more as a positive kind of definition, right? Someone who has a drug habit, want to change that again to someone with a substance use disorder or drug use, so it doesn't sound like it's something that they just kind of wanted to be in, and that's where they are now, because no one really intentionally wants to be addicted to drugs. It's something that happens because of the way our system is now used to those drugs. So we just kind of want to help a person identify themselves as that person rather than that problem that they have. So it's something we slowly want to kind of change the way people speak about drugs, to make it more, not necessarily more acceptable, but more realizing that, hey, this is a person with a struggle and we want to help them. Now, I want to talk a little bit about harm reduction. When it comes to drug use, harm reduction's kind of gotten a bad rap. People think of harm reduction as encouraging someone to take drugs. That is not the idea behind harm reduction. Harm reduction is meeting a person where they are right now. They're taking those drugs. Their body needs to take the drugs. They have to take them when they need to take them. Whether it's in a back alley or in a bathroom somewhere, a person needs to take those drugs, they will take them. By providing a harm reduction site, people now have a safe place to do what they would do anyways, what they have to do anyways. So let's create an area where people can go and safely take the drugs that they're going to be taking. In a harm reduction site, very often the drugs are tested before a person takes them. And then a person will not intentionally take a drug that is going to harm them, or is going to cause an overdose, or it could kill them. If the drug tests as having fentanyl in it, or it's very high dose, they're not going to take it, because nobody wants to die. They just want to take the drugs to deal with the situation that they're at right now. So the harm reduction site does that. It meets that person where they are, gives them a safe place, safe equipment to use, and we always have someone there that is looking after people. So if something does go wrong, help can be called and that person can be helped. We also provide information for folks who are using drugs to keep them more informed about what they're using, what could happen to them, as well as information about where they can go to get help when they're ready to be helped. So harm reduction does a lot of things, very positive things, trying to keep folks alive, trying to do the best we can for them until they're ready to get help. If we look at harm reduction, we have harm reduction everywhere, right? If you look at construction sites, for example, we know construction sites can be dangerous, but we equip people with hard hats, with high-vis vests, with steel-toed boots, with proper eyewear, because people have to be there. They have to work in that dangerous environment, but we want them to be safe. If we look at bars, that's a form of harm reduction, right? We know drinking alcohol is not good for us, but people do it anyways. Well, let's give people a safe place to do something that can be quite dangerous, but there's someone there who can help them if they get into trouble. We have bartenders, we have waitresses there. They can call for help if someone drinks too much alcohol or something else happens. Like you get into a car, you put a seatbelt on. That's a form of harm reduction. We know that a car is dangerous. You could get into an accident, but we have to get into that car to get from point A to point B, but we're gonna make ourselves as safe as possible. So the harm reduction for drug use is just another form of providing a safe place for a person to do something they have to do anyways. And hopefully down the line, we can help them out of that situation they're at. Okay, so that's just my little plug on, what is harm reduction and how important it is for people. The other thing I want to kind of put out there for folks is just to let people know that we have such thing as the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act. We know in first aid, the Good Samaritan Act protects us as first aiders if we help somebody and something doesn't work out quite as planned. We did the best we could. We were there to help that person. The laws protect us for that purpose. The same thing goes for the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act. It is there to protect people who are willing to step forward and help someone in a drug poisoning situation. Unfortunately, what has happened in the past is if someone got in trouble with drugs, they're overdosing or in that poisoning state, then we hope that people call for help and stay there and help that person. In the past, people would disappear right away when an overdose happened. They run, they don't want to be involved with the situation because they're afraid that when police arrived, they could be charged with the drug possession charge if there are drugs around there, or charged with possessing drug paraphernalia. But we know that that is not the situation with the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act. A person who is at that scene, there are drugs there, paraphernalia is there, drug equipment's there, that person will not be charged with anything related to the drug situation at that time, because we want to ensure that people help. So the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act kicks in and protects anyone that is willing to help that person who's going through that drug situation right now. It doesn't mean that the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act is going to cover them for everything. There's an outstanding warrant against them for other situations. And yes, they could be arrested at that point, but they will not be arrested for anything to do with the drug scene at that point in time. Okay. Now, I did mention the word drug poisoning a few times instead of overdosing. The reason we've changed that terminology is because a person never goes out of their way to intentionally overdose on a drug. If that overdose has happened, it's usually because their body needed to use more of the medication in order to deal with that pain or whatever situation that's happening to them. And they've used more than they should have. And that causes an overdose. But what it means is the body's been poisoned. And when the person goes to the hospital, it is treated as a poisoning. So we do refer to that overdose as a drug poisoning because the system has been poisoned, whether it's by too much drugs or because some additional drug was added into the existing drug that that person was taking. It could have been fentanyl that was added in, it could have been carfentanil, could have been xylazine, but that causes an emergency for that person because their system has now been poisoned. And just to clarify that terminology there. But so that's, again, a little reminder here that the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act is there to protect people should they help someone who's going through that poisoning situation. Now, what are opioids? Opioids are a class of powerful drugs that are usually prescribed to treat severe pain. So people who think of opioids, use difficulties, or substance dependencies may think of street obtained or street opioids such as heroin or fentanyl. And yes, the people do get poisoned on those drugs as well. But like I said, majority of the time, it is not necessarily the street opioids that kill people. It is any kind of opioids that people consume, and they might not even be aware that they are taking opioids. Or they might be taking opioids that they had to turn to the street because maybe the prescription that they were getting from their doctor is now not enough for what they need to deal with the pain. So they had to turn to street drugs to get what they need. And anytime you turn to street drugs, well, you never know what you're getting, right? So unfortunately, a lot of people who deal with excruciating pain and they can't get enough of the meds that they need from their doctor, they will turn to the streets to get what they need. And that's where we see, obviously, problems that start to occur. I just have a slide here that just identifies some of those street drugs that we do find out on our streets in Winnipeg here in Manitoba. So we do find a lot of heroin, we do find fentanyl. Heroin come in three different forms typically here. We have the powdered form, we have the solid rock form, and then we have the injectable. When it comes to heroin, heroin can be found in all kind of different colors, just like fentanyl. Can't just say, well, this is what color you'll find it in, this is what shape you'll find it in. It all depends on how the drug dealers made those drugs at that time. And for that powdered heroin, you're seeing two powdered piles there, a white powder and a brown powder. The white powdered one it's called pure, quote unquote, pure heroin. But in North America, it's very rare to find pure heroin because heroin comes from the poppy plant, right? So you have to grow the poppy plant, you have to wait for it to mature, then you have to score the poppy head, extract the liquid from it, dry it, and it's quite a process. So it will be very costly to try and grow the poppies to make the heroin that we need here. Drug dealers would never be able to keep up with the demand. It would be very expensive as well. So a lot of the heroin that we do get in North America, the majority of it comes from overseas. Now, just to kind of give you an idea of what state that drug is in when it comes to us here in North America, when the heroin, when the poppies are processed overseas, they have to make their way somehow to North America. Typically, what happens is the heroin is cooked down to a liquid, and then material is soaked up, or that heroin is soaked up into different types of materials, such as clothing, area rugs, toys. So once that material is dried, it's then packaged up, sent to North America, and at this end here, that heroin has to be cooked down to be extracted from all that material that it came in. And very often, you have particles of that material that gets left behind in the heroin. We have the color that is extracted, the dyes are extracted from the material that is now left in that heroin. So when someone uses the heroin, it's no longer pure heroin. We have all that extra material and particles that are mixed into it. So that pile of white pure heroin is not pure heroin. It's got all kind of dirt and particles in it. The brown pile that you're seeing there, we refer to that one as China white. Not quite sure why it's called China white, because it's definitely not white. It could be, again, all kind of different colors depending on what material it's mixed with. We have seen heroin that is mixed with shoe polish. We've seen it mixed with coffee grounds. We've seen it mixed with all kind of different products. And that is the drugs that people very often inject or snort or whichever way they take it. Now, the rock form of heroin that looks like a little like a lava rock is very light, very porous, feels very grindy, and that's usually ground down and either smoked or cooked down into an injectable. The injectable that we're seeing there is kind of a dark brownish color. If you ever come across a syringe that has heroin in it, it's gonna look much lighter. It's like a light iced tea, but again with little particles floating around because it's not pure. Fentanyl is a very common drug, unfortunately, that we find on our streets, as well as being prescribed. And fentanyl can come in liquid, in a vial, very rarely found on the street that way. We typically find it as capsules and tablets. They can be all kind of colors, all kind of shapes. And sometimes we find them as patches as well. Anyone that is suffering through end life treatment or really severe pain due to their medical condition, they'll be prescribed fentanyl patches, and they'll be on their chest usually. And those are very, very high potent patches that are on time release. So it releases when that person typically needs it. They're very expensive. And very often, unfortunately, people will sell their patches to someone who wants them. And they're really quite high in demand on the streets because they are so powerful. So people really love to get their hands on the fentanyl patches. And then they chew them to get the drugs that they need or scrape down the paste and cook it down into an injectable. But people really try hard to get their hands on it. Now, fentanyl is such a huge problem on our streets. Because it is extremely easy, unfortunately, to make fentanyl. And all the ingredients that you need to make fentanyl, you can buy it anywhere, really. You can get the equipment anywhere. You can get it off Amazon, off Wish. So people can order what they need and very quickly whip up a batch of fentanyl and have it out on the streets. That is why it is so rampant on our streets, because it is so easy for drug dealers to get it out there. And very often drug dealers are going to use fentanyl because it is really cheap to make. They're going to use it to fluff up their other drugs. It could be heroin, for example. So it's a cheap way of getting their heroin to go further so they can charge more for it. But unfortunately, we see fentanyl and even carfentanil mixed into those street drugs very often. Here, I just want to show you, just to give you an idea, how much it would take for a regular person to be poisoned by heroin, fentanyl, or carfentanil. If it's someone who's never taken drugs before, or they've been in rehab, or they've been incarcerated for a while, and they've come back out and they want to start using again, it would only take about 30 milligrams of heroin for someone to be poisoned. Fentanyl, it would only take about 3 milligrams, because fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine, so extremely powerful, but it lasts only for a little while. Now, in carfentanil, a person can be poisoned on just 1 grain of carfentanil, which is the size of a salt grain. It is extremely powerful. It's about 100 times stronger than fentanyl. Carfentanil is an animal tranquilizer used to tranquilize elephants and rhinos. So you can imagine what that does to the human body. Now, any of those drugs, because they're opioids, they immediately affect the brain. And the brain then transfers that to the central nervous system. So the central nervous system, now the pain sensors in the central nervous system get blocked to deal with the pain, which is why people are taking the opioids. But unfortunately, the central nervous system also controls your respiratory system. So the higher the dosage, the less pain the person feels, but also now the respiratory system is starting to slow down to the point where respiration is going to stop. And that's when when we see that opioid poisoning happen, is when that respiratory system now shuts down or is in the process of shutting down. And when that happens, what we need to do is quickly get oxygen to that person's brain, because the brain only lasts about 3 to 4 minutes without oxygen, and then it starts to die. So when we find someone who's unresponsive and not breathing, we want to quickly start CPR to get oxygen in their brain. And if you happen to have naloxone or Narcan on you, we want to administer that to that person who is going through that opioid poisoning, because that Narcan or naloxone will temporarily reverse that opioid poisoning that is happening and hopefully get that respiratory system restarted until we can get medical help to that person. So calling 911 for someone who is going through an opioid poisoning is super, super important, because that poisoning, that overdose, does not go away on its own. A person needs to be helped at the hospital to deal with that poisoning that is happening. Now, a fourth drug that I don't have on here, because it is fairly new to Winnipeg, to Manitoba, is xylazine. Xylazine is an animal tranquilizer, but used to tranquilize farm animals. So cows, elephants, so it's cows and horses. So it is meant for smaller animals, not an elephant or a rhino, but it still carries quite a powerful punch, and it still shuts down the respiratory system. So anyone that has been poisoned by carfentanil or xylazine, unfortunately, the odds of them being revived are really slim, because those drugs are so powerful. They've shut down the respiratory system, and it is next to impossible to restart it again. Naloxone works pretty good with fentanyl. As long as the dosage isn't extremely high, we should be able to get that person rebreathing again with naloxone, but not so lucky with carfentanil and xylazine. And unfortunately, we have been seeing quite a few poisonings with carfentanil and xylazine nowadays. And so, yeah, I can tell you that it's very unlikely that that person can be revived. Now, how does naloxone work? Well, naloxone affects the opioid receptors in the brain. So what the naloxone will do is it makes its way to the brain and finds those opioid receptors and literally kicks those opioid molecules out of the brain, and then saran wraps the brain receptor to protect them so that the opioids cannot affect that central nervous system anymore. And that is only going to work for a very short time. It's temporary. It will work for about 10-15 minutes. And then what happens, that naloxone breaks down, and the opioid molecules are waiting to jump on the brain receptor again as soon as it's available. So when that naloxone breaks down, the opioids affect the brain receptors again, and that person goes into that poisoning state again. We can give them more naloxone, and it's going to reverse the situation again, kick out those opioid molecules, saran wrap that brain receptor, and protect that person for another 10-15 minutes. And hopefully by that time, paramedics have arrived, and they have their naloxone with them. They'll do what they can to keep that person alive and breathing until they can get him to medical help and to the hospital. So that's kind of how naloxone works. And there are two ways that we can administer naloxone, either using a nasal spray like this or using an injectable. The nasal spray goes right up the nose. You push the plunger and it delivers the dose right up through the nasal cavity into the brain and starts to work within about 2 to 3 minutes. The injectable, that one goes into the upper arm, into the muscle, and that one takes about 5 minutes for it to work. So it all depends on what you have on you. If you don't have any naloxone on you and a person is going through an opiate poisoning, at least start CPR. That gets oxygen to the person's brain, keeps the brain alive until paramedics arrive, and they'll have their naloxone on there. Paramedics, they'll have their naloxone. Same thing with police. Everybody carries naloxone with them so that we can assist that person until we get them to medical help. So what is an opiate poisoning? It happens when a toxic amount of drugs or a combination of drugs overwhelms the body. Here I have a chart that kind of identifies what does a person who is in opiate poisoning situation look like. Okay, so we have three different types of poisonings here. We have a typical poisoning, we have a dissociative poisoning, or as we used to call it, an ugly overdose. And then there's an atypical poisoning or a soft overdose. So in a typical poisoning, if someone's using heroin or fentanyl, or the regular pain meds, what you're going to notice is that they're going to start to get drowsier and drowsier. And as they're getting drowsier and drowsier, their respiratory system starts to slow down to the point where it might stop, right? If we take a look at a person's eyes, and if you notice that their pupils are tiny little dots for pupils, that tells you that they're using some form of an opiate-based drug. That doesn't mean they're overdosing, that they're poisoning. That just means that at this point, they're using something with opioids. When that poisoning happens, you're going to notice that, well, that level of consciousness is going to start to drop. Their respiration is going to start to slow down. You might notice that their lips and their fingernails are starting to turn kind of bluish, grayish, because their oxygen level is starting to deplete, starting to drop because their respiratory system is starting to slow down. If they have passed out, they are unresponsive, unconscious on the ground. You might notice that their breathing is extremely slow or has stopped, and then they're extremely limp. So they'll feel like spaghetti if you lift their arms or their legs. If they've been down for a little while, you might notice that you might hear gurgling or snoring sounds because their airway is being obstructed now. Okay? In those situations there, if they're completely unconscious, they're not breathing, you give them naloxone and start CPR if you have naloxone. Okay? If you're noticing those little pupils and they're starting to lose consciousness, but they are still kind of breathing, they're still not completely out of it, you can offer them to take naloxone if you have it. And if they take it, great. But because they're conscious, you need to get their consent, right? So if you're offering them naloxone and they don't want it, you can't force it on them. Okay? It'll be just a couple minutes and they're probably going to pass out. And at that point, you'll have implied consent. Then you can administer naloxone. But in the meantime, while they said no and they're conscious, you can't do anything. Okay. So that is your typical poisoning. That's the one we would come across most often. Now, if a person has been poisoned by opioids and there's carfentanil or nitazenes in it, you're going to notice the same signs and symptoms, right? Graying lips, graying fingernails, bluish. Their pupils are going to be very tiny, little pinpoint pupils. The difference that we're going to see here is when this person passes out, and if they have carfentanil in their system, they're going to be curled up in the fetal position. Their arms are going to be crossed over their chest. Their legs are going to be bent right up to their knees, up to their chest. And you're going to find that you're going to see that their jaw is going to be clenched shut. The muscles in their neck are going to be flexed and strained, and you won't be able to move them. It's like they're in rigor mortis. They're completely stiff. The problem with this kind of an overdose is that if they're not breathing and we have to provide CPR, it is really, really hard to do that. Because what you have to do is you have to try and pry the arms away from their chest. You got to pry those legs away from their chest. You got to do that head tilt chin lift, which is going to be really tough to do because they're really stiff. And you have to try and open their jaw to get air, get oxygen into it. So it takes a long time and a lot of work to perform CPR on someone in this state. So you can see just the length of time that I would take is now increasing the amount of time they're without oxygen. And so trying to get that oxygen to them is really tough. Hopefully you can get to them and give them that oxygen, but it will take a bit of time. And we do our best until medical help can get there. Now in that atypical poisoning or soft overdose column, again, same signs and symptoms, tiny pinpoint pupils, lips, fingernails will be graying or purplish because of the lack of oxygen. they're going to be, if they're unconscious on the floor, we're going to try and provide CPR. We're going to try and give them naloxone if we can. If we do manage to reverse that poisoning, great. They're going to be breathing. Their color is going to come back, but they're not going to wake up from that poisoning as they would have from a typical poisoning, because in an atypical poisoning, they're also being poisoned on benzodiazepine. So it's a different base drug. It is not a sedative, right? Like fentanyl or heroin. So that fentanyl or heroin poisoning is going to be reversed, but that benzo is still poisoning their system. So we're dealing with both uppers and downers at the same time, but at least they're breathing. They might not be conscious, but they're breathing, so they're alive. And when paramedics arrive, they'll take them to the hospital, and there they can deal with the other poisoning that is happening. All right, so these are the different signs and symptoms to expect that you could come across if someone is going through a poisoning state. When you arrive on the scene where someone is possibly going through a poisoning, make sure you do a scene survey, make sure the scene is safe, make sure there are no sharps or drugs or bodily fluids there that can hurt you. Make sure you have gloves on. If you have to perform CPR, make sure you're using a mask to protect yourself and keep yourself safe. So we do also recommend that along with first aid kits, depending on where you work, that you bring along with you that naloxone kit if you have one on you, 2 preferably, because in a nasal spray naloxone kit, you have 2 doses. In the injectable, you have 3 doses. So it should give you enough time to help that person while we're waiting for medical help. Okay. So what is in a kit? Well, as I mentioned, in the nasal spray one, it comes in a hard case kit. You have 2 sprays that come along with it. They're stored in these little yogurt cups, basically. And 1 spray has 1 dose in it. So 2 sprays, you have 2 doses. It comes with a pair of gloves. It comes with a barrier. So if you do have to perform CPR, make sure you use that barrier to protect yourself from mouth-to-mouth contact, because you never know how that person took the drugs, right? So most of these face shields or face barriers come with one-way valves, so that when you breathe into the casualty, you can breathe in, but that valve prevents anything from coming back at you, okay? So those come in that kit. Just follow the instructions. You can't go wrong, okay? It also comes with a card that you can fill out to identify when you had, if you had any training, which you would receive if you buy a kit or get yourself a kit at a drugstore or a harm reduction site or addiction site, okay? And you also will get a card that comes, a little poster, I should say, that comes along with it that identifies what we call the Save Me steps, which we'll look at in a little while. Okay. Now, how do we administer nasal naloxone? Very simple. You peel off the back of the package, pop out your nasal spray, which looks like this. Looks like a little nasal decongestant container. We'll put this in behind, see if it helps. And then what you do is you place 2 fingers on either side of that nozzle. The thumb on the plunger. Make sure you do not test the plunger before administering, because you could lose the entire contents of the spray. Now what you're gonna do is do a head tilt chin lift on a person that's unconscious, spray the spray up the nose, and then if that person's not breathing, start CPR. Perform CPR for about 2 minutes, so those 5 sets of compressions and ventilations, and then check to see if that person is breathing. If they're not breathing, you would administer another dose of the spray and continue with CPR. You're gonna keep doing that until either the person starts breathing or you've run out of naloxone, and at that point, you'll be performing just CPR until medical help gets there. Okay. Now, if naloxone isn't working, it could be that the person has taken a very powerful drug. There's a lot of the drug in their system, or the person's circulatory system is stopped, they're in cardiac arrest, and the medication to make its way up to the brain. But if you're performing CPR, it will help get the medication to the brain. Okay. If the person is not completely unconscious and they're refusing that naloxone, as I mentioned, they might refuse it. If they refuse it, there's nothing you can do about it because they could be avoiding that withdrawal. They might just want to be left alone to deal with that high that they're feeling right now. So we just can't force them. Okay? Try to educate them, let them know that if they don't take naloxone, they're probably going to be passing out soon, but you do need to call 911 to get them that help. All right. Sometimes a person, when they get out that overdose, that poisoning, they could just jump up and run away. It's possible. Don't try to stop them. Just make a note of what they're wearing and which way they're going so we can point EMS in the right direction, because that person is going to be dropping shortly. They're going to go unconscious again. So we want medical help to find them. Okay, in an intramuscular kit, what do we find in there? Well, it'll be again another case similar to this one. There will be 3 syringes in that case, along with 3 tiny little vials of the naloxone. You'll have gloves, you'll have the face shield, you'll have that Save Me insert as well. 3 alcohol wipes. I usually don't worry about the alcohol wipes. I don't have time to sterilize everything before injecting. We just want to get that medication in that person's arm or in their thigh and get them, try to save their life. You will also find a little plastic cap in with the intramuscular. That is used to kind of slip it over the head of the vial so that it's easier for you to break it. If you don't have those plastic caps, that's what I usually use the alcohol wipes for, to pop the head off the vial so I can get to the medication. So how do we administer the injectable one? Well, first thing we do is peel back the package of the syringe and take a look at what is the color of the cap of that syringe. If it's orange, that means that this is a vanishing point syringe, which is really handy to have because once you push the injection in and the medicine has been injected, the needle actually retracts itself so nobody gets poked by it. If the cap is blue, it is not a retractable. It is not a vanishing point needle, so you have to be a little bit more careful with that one. Okay, so what I would do here is I would open up the package that the syringe comes in, and then I glide the plunger in the barrel a little bit just to make sure that it does slide. It's not stuck, so I don't spill my medication around after when I try to pull it up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my vial, tap it a little bit to get the fluid down, because sometimes it gets stuck in the head here. Then I take my little plastic cap or my alcohol swipe and crack the top of the vial off, and you're going to have something that looks similar to this one. So now I would put that broken vial on the ground and extract my needle, my syringe. Take the cap off and carefully extract the medication from the vial. Once I've done that, got all the medication out, I will now get the air bubble out of the needle, or as much of it as I can. If there's a little bit of air in there left, don't worry about it. It's not going to kill the person. It's not going to harm them. We're not putting it into an artery. The medication is going into the muscle. So they might be a little sore from having that air in there, but it's not going to harm them. And then as you see on the slide, you put it straight directly into the muscle at a 90-degree angle. Don't angle it in from up or down. It's straight into the muscle in the arm or in the thigh. Either one is fine. Okay, then once you've injected that person, just make sure you put that needle aside so nobody gets hurt, especially if it's not a vanishing point one. Okay, so with the injectable, pokes can happen, so just be careful with that. I always recommend not to pass needle from one person to the next when you're doing that injection, so that the person who's holding the injection is the one who injects the person and no one can get hurt. There can be some blood spatter that could happen. If it does happen, wash yourself off with water or saline solution as soon as possible and let paramedics know, especially if the blood got into your eyes or mouth or something like that. They would definitely recommend a treatment for you at the hospital for that. So make sure your gloves are on, make sure you're well protected. That's the main thing with the needles, and make sure no one steps on those sharps. Okay, so those save me steps, just to quickly go through those before we call it the hour here. So save me, that's an acronym for stimulate, airway, ventilate, evaluate, medicate, and evaluate again. So the S is to stimulate that casualty. We want to try and keep them conscious so that they're breathing. So talk to them, yell at them, let them know you're going to call 911. Try to stimulate them if they're not fully conscious. You can rub their collarbone, pinch their collarbone, kick their feet, do something to see if you can keep them conscious. But make sure you definitely call 911 immediately, because that person needs to go to the hospital. When you do call 911, tell the dispatcher you and your casualty's exact location so they don't have to look for you. Describe every sign and symptom that you're observing of that person. Don't make any assumptions unless you're 110% sure that this is an overdose or poisoning. Do not tell 911 that this is what it is. Tell them, describe those signs and symptoms. We don't make any judgments here. The A in Save Me is for airway. So if that person is unconscious, we're going to do a head tilt chin lift to open the airway and check to see if they're breathing. So you put your cheek to their nose and mouth, watch their chest, and check for 5 to 10 seconds to see if you're seeing them take a breath. If you did not see them take a breath, what you're now going to do is ventilate them. You're going to give them one breath every 5 seconds for a total of 5 breaths. What we're trying to do here is see if we can stimulate the brain to remind it that the respiratory system is supposed to work. Sometimes they will restart breathing at that point because we could kickstart the brain. But we're going to evaluate. Are they breathing? Did those 5 breaths really help? Is that person waking up? If not, then we're going to go to the next step, which is the medication. So again, you would take that injection or the nasal spray, administer it, start CPR if they're not breathing, and do that CPR for 2 minutes, 5 sets of compressions and ventilations, and then check to see did that work. If not, give them another dose and keep going with CPR. You can give safely up to about 6 doses of naloxone, and then I recommend stop for about half an hour. Because even if they're not breathing, there's so much naloxone in their system, you're not going to hurt them by giving them more, but they're so saturated with it that giving them more is not going to help them any. So at that point, I always say wait for about half an hour, let the naloxone work its way through the system. If paramedics still haven't arrived at that point and you have more naloxone on you, go ahead and start with another few doses. And then if you hit 8 again, stop again for about half an hour. But hopefully by that time, medical help has arrived. Okay. Even if you're not sure if the person took opioids or something else, give them naloxone. It's not going to hurt them. If it's not opioid based, it's not going to work, but it's not going to hurt them. Okay, so you can never hurt anyone with naloxone. Here we have the signs that naloxone is working. Well, the pupils are going to return to their normal size. Color is going to come back to the skin, nails, lips. Breathing rate is going to increase, or at least start. Casualty is going to start waking up, and withdrawal symptoms are going to start to kick in. Okay, so all signs that naloxone is working. And this is what you would see on your little chart, giving you those save me steps. Okay. And as I said, you can get a kit at harm reduction sites. You can get them in pharmacies. If you're not a user, you don't need a kit, they probably won't give you one for free, but they will charge you for it. But you can at least still get it that way. But we can get them through different addiction treatment centers. Just let them know that you work in an environment where you could come across an opiate poisoning and you want to be prepared, and they'll provide you with a kit. Okay. And having said that, that will take me to the end. 1 hour right on the dot here. So I just gave you a slide here that has some links or numbers to help you folks out if you need more information. But thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to take questions now, unless Megan is kicking me off the air.
I'm not kicking you off. If there is questions, now's the time. So please add them into the chat if you do have any questions for Irene. And I'd like to take this opportunity, Irene, to thank you for your session. Lots of great information. You have packed a lot of it into a 1-hour session. So thank you very much. You are very knowledgeable about this topic, and it's great to have you here sharing that, that information with us today.
Thank you. And I did have Farron who popped up, said reminded us that the 988 is that new suicide hotline that came into existence in the end of November. So yes, it's definitely something I'm going to add to that slide, but I want people to definitely know that 988 is an important one.
Absolutely. Thank you. I don't want to rush anyone, but if you have a question, please add it to the chat. I did want to take an opportunity while people may be thinking of a question. Irene, if you would like to stop the sharing of your screen, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that we have going on this Safety and Health Week. After today's session, we have 2 more sessions coming up. One tomorrow afternoon with Marty Danielson, and then on Thursday with our Workers' Compensation Board. So I'm just going to share my screen. We always want to make sure that people are aware of things happening. So this is our session happening tomorrow with Marty Danielson. If you haven't already registered, you can register through our website. On Thursday, we have Workers' Compensation Board presenting on return to work programs and how to build a successful program in your workplace. And then just a note, if you have workers or work sites in the PAW or Thompson, we will be doing training there later on in May. We also have an app that if you don't already have on your phone or device, please download it. It has a lot of great information there regarding the legislation. So you can download that for free. In addition, we've got lots of toolbox talks on our website. So if you're looking for opportunities to share information at toolbox talks and looking for information, our website has that. Also, the safety scene on our website is your one-stop spot to know what's happening in safety in Manitoba. So check that out. We also are very active on social media, so that may be how you found out about this webinar today. So please feel free to follow us on social media. And last but not least, please take the opportunity today to scan this QR code and complete the evaluation of today's webinar. We would very much value your feedback on today's session with Irene. When you do scan this QR code, it will take you to SurveyMonkey, and it will identify the actual session. So click on the Safety and Health Week webinar and click on Irene's name, and then you can give your feedback on today's session. So thank you again. We really appreciate everyone's attendance today. I'm not seeing anything else coming in the chat. So Irene, thank you again. And we value your participation in today's session. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.